Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rachel,
I'm Todd.
and this is the second entry to our top 10 series where we're just going to share with you the top 10 things that we considered when property searching for our homestead.
Yep, we moved 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
It's 17. 3 years ago in March.
In March will be 3 years ago we moved from the city, from a little subdivision, not in a big city by any means, out to the country where we live now. And we had a big list that we used when we were shopping for property of things that we wanted, things that we didn't want to compromise on, things that we were willing to compromise on, and that's what we wanted to go through with you guys today was, what did our list look like?
And just to give you some background, we searched before we settled and put in an offer on this property for about 6 months and looked at a lot of places. Okay, so number one is zoning. I mean, it was the main reason ultimately that we were moving from our suburban little tiny homestead starter that we had started to realizing that we had to leave if we wanted to do homesteading the way it meant to us. I wasn't allowed to have chickens there. I was really limited to just gardening in the space that I had in our backyard. So, and I didn't really understand what that meant. I had heard a lot of people talk about it on YouTube at the time, understanding your zoning regulations. And it's different no matter where you live. So if you are looking in an area, go to whatever that township, village, county website is, and they're going to have the zoning regulations and guidelines. Print it off and read it. Read it, read it, read it. Mark it up, highlight it, call them up, go in and meet with them, and point out the property that you're looking at. There's usually a zoning map also on there if you know they have their act together. So I knew for instance, this property was zoned residential ag. So it's a little bit different than just being farm ag. It was residential ag. But everybody's zoning restrictions are different. Things you're going to want to consider, is there a limit to how many farm animals of each type you can have on your property?
Based on acreage and things like that.
Right. Is there fencing strict restrictions, like you can't have fencing in your front yard, only in your backyard? Is there zoning requirements with respect to frontage that you have to have from your property lines to any infrastructure that you want to put in place, whether it be barns or ponds or wells, things like that? What is their zoning restriction with respect to water? If you want to put in a pond, do you have to get basically the national government involved to do that? So there's like all kinds of things to consider. So you have to, I guess, go into it understanding what your goals are and your dreams are for your homestead, and then look at the regulations and zoning for the area that you're looking at and whether or not they're going to meet your needs.
Very, very important.
Yeah, that's number one. I would say if you don't do anything else, you have to do that.
On the topic of ponds, water was something that was important to us. And not just the water outside, as in, does the property have a pond? Is there a creek nearby that we can harvest water from to use it to feed and water our animals? Is there outside hydrants for water?
Yeah.
You know, is there yard hydrants run out into various parts of the property, or is your homestead like ours where we have one faucet on the side of our house and that's it? And for us, now that we've been here, if we want to change that, it's going to be a lot of work for us. We're going to have to either tear up some decking or remove some patios to dig the trenches to put in yard hydrants. So it's going to be some work. There's the other factor of water is you have the water that you as a human will consume. Does the property have municipal city water, or does it have well water? And if it has well water, you really need to get that checked out because there's some nasty well water out there. I've lived in a house before that had sulfur water, and it was bad. It ruins your clothes. It ruins a lot of things. So very important.
Yeah. And having not grown up with that, it was something he was very passionate about when we were looking at homes. If it was on well water, it wasn't really something he was 100% excited
Right.
about.
The home that I grew up in when I was a kid had well water, but it was very good well water. So
Yeah.
there can be good well water. So just make sure you check it out beforehand. So we looked at several houses that had alternative forms of heating, and that being wood. One of them had one of those outdoor wood boiler systems where it's set back away from the house and it runs the piping system through the house to both heat your house and your water. Seemed kind of cool.
I think that one actually heated the barn too. So that was amazing.
Radiant heat in the flooring of the
Right.
barn. Another one had the same type of setup with a wood boiler, but it was inside the house, and it had a chimney that went to the outside. But it was the same concept. It used water to heat your home, basically. Another one just had a wood stove, so that I don't know if it would be enough to heat your house as a whole, based on where it was in the house, but it was a good supplemental source of heat. And the other method would be a natural gas or propane. Now, propane is something that works well, but it can be really expensive when compared to natural gas.
So I lived one time in a house that had propane, and I know if you're on a budget, when that need to fill that big tank comes up, it hurt on the purse when that bill came due. So that wasn't something I was interested in, even though we're not as on a tight budget as I was as a single mom. It's just something to consider would be the input cost to maintain your heat. And I know when it came to wood boiler, I was all for that. I thought it was cool. It was a sustainable energy source. But Todd wasn't at the same time excited about that's a significant work effort every year to get your, cords of wood stored and prepped for every winter. While the cost might not be that great, there's an effort there to maintain that heat source.
Yeah.
So the house that we do have is natural gas. So it's been good from an economical perspective. Now, I know a big one that I spent a lot of time on that I kept running into dead ends and dead ends and dead ends was the need for high-speed internet. And you're all not going to have the same need that we do. Todd's basically works like an on-call job and has to be able to immediately respond to work emergencies from home and remote into work and handle that. And we couldn't do that on a low speed satellite. A lot of them offered like satellite connections, or you could do through your cellular provider, mobile hotspot type setup in your home, which is extremely expensive. So that ended up closing a lot of doors. I went all the way to the effort on one home that I wanted this home so bad. I mean, it had the infrastructure, it had everything. But there was no high-speed internet. It was just down the road. Like, I could see the lines, like 200 yards down the road. So I called the cable company and asked what it would cost to run lines down to this house. So like $20,000.
$20,000 they wanted.
Yeah, so that was, it's just, maybe you could then work that into your budget, though, to let you know that is an option, that if you know it's nearby, yet you're getting a really good deal on a piece of property, it might be worth that extra cost to work that into your budget.
Land maintenance can be definitely something to think about, especially when you start talking about quantities of land. We looked at properties with 3 acres, and we kind of felt that it's kind of not enough. We want more space. We want more land available to us, not just now, but for future plans. If we want to raise a steer someday, to have some beef or things like that, we wanted more than just 3 acres. And then there's the care and feeding and maintenance of that land as well. You know, do you have 10 acres with 5 acres of its woods, so you don't have to do much with the woods right now, or do you have 15 acres and it's all grass and it needs to be mowed once a week in the summer? So those are some things to consider as well.
Yes. When we were prepping for this video, Todd's like, I would have taken 20 acres. I'm like, let me remind you that we looked at a 10-acre property and you were like, no, that's way too much land. I don't want to mow all this. And he's like, okay, but if it was like 15 acres of woods and 5 acres of land, I was like, well, that wasn't an option then. So it's just kind of know what you're really looking for and what you're willing to manage with respect to the land. Basically, if you're looking, I know for us, when we're looking to buy a homestead here in Michigan, the only thing that was available to us within our price range, mind you, were homes that were, 75 to 200 years old, and they're well within their maintenance cycle. So we ended up, this house was built in 1876. A lot of the homes, though, you're talking about generation evolution multiple times over, and they've added on, and it's gone from non-electricity era to having electricity to electricity upgrades and homegrown installations and builds. And so you have to go into it with a little bit of an open mind if you can, to understand, at least we did, what are we willing to take on with respect to home repairs and home management. And this home was fairly move-in ready. I mean, there's definitely significant investments that we're budgeting for, like it's got the original windows in it that you can, like, your hair blows when the wind blows. So we need to get new windows. I mean, the basement really needs some foundational support structure put in for the house, because you could probably lay a marble on the floor anywhere and get a nice 10-degree roll going. So things like that. I will tell you the one example of the house that I really want. What scared Todd away was looking at the electrical and plumbing work that had been done on that house. He's like, Rachel, this is all so very, very wrong.
It was bad.
So, but maybe you're really skilled in that, and that's not a scary thing for you. So talk with your partner and understand, what are we willing to tackle?
For this house, even though it's old, the roof was probably 1 year old when we moved in. The septic system that got put in was less than 10 years ago. All the electrical has been stripped out and replaced with modern, non-cloth wrapped, proper wiring. All the plumbing has been replaced with PVC. So
Yeah.
I felt pretty good about the infrastructure.
Right.
But keep in mind, you may have some work to do.
So both of us do still work full-time, and commute was something that we had to think about. Where we live in Southeast Michigan, we live in basically farm country, but basically the I-75 corridor isn't necessarily farm country that people typically commute on. So you have to go out a ways to find homestead type lands and home properties. So, I mean, in the search, the amount of properties available are far and few between. So we were having to look, like, probably sometimes much further than we were willing to commute. And there were, really great deals, but it would have, added 30 minutes to our commute, 45 minutes to our commute, things like that. And that really wasn't something that we really wanted to take on. So think about your commute as being away from your family if you're still working, going to be worth it if you're having to add on 2 hours driving both ways.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of commutes. I consider commute time work time. So if my commute is in 45 minutes to and from work every day, that's
Yeah.
work time, and I should be home.
Right.
So when you live in a rural area or out in the country, your neighbors can be pretty important people to you. They can be there to help you out when you get a bad snowstorm and you need help getting out of your driveway. They can rely on you just like you can rely on them. So neighbors can be pretty important. We were fortunate enough that the very first day we came here to look at this property, we walked around the house and we were heading out back to the field to go exploring and see what we can find, and one of the neighbors stopped by. Hey, how you doing? You looking at the house? And we sat and chatted with him for maybe 20 minutes. And he told us about the other neighbors around the area and some of the history of the house, and kind of filled us in quite a bit. So it was very helpful.
And it gave us a really good feeling that somebody is aware of what's going on in the neighborhood. They're friendly enough to come out and talk to strangers. I will be honest with you. We've attempted to be neighborly to other neighbors nearby that are like, basically, what are you doing on my property? So we're thankful for the couple neighbors that we do have nearby us that are super friendly, super welcoming. And that gave us a good feeling. So we would just recommend that if you do have neighbors, directly bordering your property, that you stop in and just introduce yourself, get a feel of, what you're walking into. Because when you do homestead, especially on land that's not been homesteaded before, in the sense that you're going to be raising livestock or animals, the last thing you want to introduce is bitter neighbors that are suddenly upset with the rooster crowing at 5 a.m., with the goats bellowing, screaming when they're in heat or whatever it is. So you kind of just want to talk to them, tell them about what your plans are if you were to buy that property, if they'd have any issues, just feel them out a little bit. If, you don't buy the place, it doesn't hurt anything. They'll never see you again.
One of the things we kept coming across when we would look at properties was infrastructure. What type of infrastructure was there existing, or was there none? There was no fencing, there was no outbuildings, no barns, or what was already there and existing, was it even in good shape? Because there was one property we looked at and it had a pretty decent sized barn. I don't know if you'd call it, wasn't a full-size 2-story barn, but it was a barn and we could have used it as such. But all of the timbers all the way around the bottom of the foundation were completely rotten. I don't know exactly how the thing was still standing, but it was, maybe not for long. And the same for fencing. The one property we looked at that we couldn't get internet access to had an elaborate fencing setup. The guy would raise 15 to 20 cattle per year there on the back part of that property. So
Yeah,
it had
cattle chutes and everything.
a lot of infrastructure in place. So you need to know kind of what your plan is going to look like for the long term and what your needs are going to be to meet that plan, and then kind of match that up with the infrastructure of what your needs are, how much extra work and money you're willing to put in that missing infrastructure, just to try to make sure your needs are met.
Right. So that leads us right into the last point that we'll make, and this is our top 10 of 10, I guess. And that is ultimately compromise, right? So whenever you're going to be buying an existing homestead, not building one from scratch, you're never going to find your ideal. If you do, bravo to you. But typically, unless you have somebody out there who's living your double life, no one's going to have built it out the way that you would have built it out. So there's a lot of, ultimately, Todd and I wrote a list of the things that we were looking for, and which things ultimately we'd be willing to compromise on. So, for example, I don't have the proper barn, but we do have structures on the place that we can utilize. Maybe not ultimately just house our animals, but for other things. We were fortunate that we had a couple paddocks. They weren't perfect, but we could rebuild them the way that we needed to get some initial use for raising our pigs and goats.
And they're also maybe not the way we would have done it.
Right.
But we can take advantage of that infrastructure and modify it to suit our needs.
And then ultimately, probably the biggest compromise I made, just because I did fall in love with the history of the home itself, the land. It met our commute requirements perfectly. It met our zoning requirements perfectly. So it met so many of the criteria. But guys, I wanted a big, big living room. I have never had a big living room. My kids are going to start getting married, grandkids. That was the whole plan for this house, right? We were becoming empty nesters. I have all these grandbabies soon. And I needed a big living room. It doesn't have that. It has a very, very small living room. So
Which gets crowded
Yeah.
on Thanksgiving and Christmas. And
it's coming someday soon. Yeah. So in the 10-year plan is an addition to our homestead. So that wraps up our top 10. And hopefully it was just some of the things that seriously influenced our decision making when we were searching our homestead. We hope that it helps you in any way if you're just in the dreaming phase or in the active searching phase on things to consider and what things to research.
So thanks for watching, guys. I'm curious to know if you guys have things. What are your things that you're not willing to compromise on? Leave some comments down below and let's get some dialogue going. And I want to hear what's important to you guys.
So we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.